Mr Speaker. Today I'm going to just address the corrosive substances provision of this bill and welcome the progress that's been made. Had I realised the direction that this debate was going to take, I would have spoken for longer and talked about other issues around the wider concerns that we've talked about today. I've been seeking a Westminster Hall debate on those issues, so if anybody else wants to join me in trying to seek one for the dying days of this term, I would be delighted to come and join you in Westminster Hall and talk about the wider issues. But last year, there were 85 attacks using corrosive substances in Newham, 468 in the whole of London, and in the 5 years since 2012, the number of acid attacks in London has increased by some 600%. And in my constituency, it's been something of a hotspot. This time last year, the fear in my constituency about acid attacks was palpable. I heard about constituents of all ages and backgrounds afraid to leave their homes because the perception was that these acid attacks were random. It was a crisis and it needed a strong response from government, and I called for that, as did my honourable friend, the member from East Ham. And I'm happy to see today that many of the specific measures that I've called for are indeed in the bill. Most importantly, the bill takes a step forward in recognising that corrosives are just as dangerous as knives. They can do just as much harm physically and emotionally, and so they should receive the same kind of legal and police response. The introduction of a clear and specific offence for possession of a corrosive substance in public should make the job of the police and the courts easier in catching and prosecuting those who carry acid as a weapon. The ban on sale of corrosive products to children is also very welcome, although I join with colleagues in questioning whether a higher age restriction, though I accept the arguments around 18, but I do wonder whether or not a higher age restriction might be appropriate. I also think that the Bill Committee should look closely at the broader issue of supply and not just sale. Would it be better to introduce an offence for supplying a child with acid in an unsafe way, not just selling in exchange for money, which I suggested last year? It's important, I think, to get this right, because some acid attacks are, I am told, revenge, punishment, or even an initiation rite by junior members of gangs, of criminally run gangs. And if an older man gives acid to a child and tells a child to commit an offence, to commit an attack, would that act of giving be covered by an offence in this bill? Could we prosecute the man who has given the acid to the child as effectively as we would have done if he had taken money from it? Over the past year, because I personally think that is possibly a higher offence than that of the unwitting sales or the not taking the responsibilities of a salesperson as seriously as the law demands. Over the last year, I've raised several concerns about online sales of corrosive products, and at this time last year, you could buy a 96% concentrated sulphuric acid in large bottles from Amazon for about £5 each. No checks. There is still a requirement for online sellers, like all sellers, to monitor for suspicious purchases under the Poisons Act of 1972. But the government's failed to convince me that they can implement or enforce this online. So I do welcome the ban on home deliveries of corrosive products. I think that would take us where we need to be. I hope it will, indirectly, ban these sales, because if we can't make online sales safe, they simply have to be stopped to protect communities. I think this bill is a step forward. I think it will help to ensure that sellers of these projects have face-to-face contact with buyers and can ask them questions. There's really no other way that the law could work. It was always, frankly, a bit of a joke to suggest that online sellers could monitor for suspicious purchases, and I think we got that message across in the debate that we had before Christmas. I hope this change will make suspicious transaction reporting more workable, but putting a greater emphasis on reporting by retailers only increases the need for proper guidance and for the Home Office to monitor and enforce the legal requirement. Retailers have to understand that there is a real chance that the government will take action against them if they fail. And I've asked the department in written questions before about whether the Home Office has a programme of test purchases, but I keep being given, bless them, vague answers to the questions that I've asked. And so I'd like to hear from the Minister today, either today or, if she wants to, write to me about this issue. I will indeed.
She's making an excellent speech, and she has done a lot of campaigning on this issue, and I do congratulate her.
Thank you.
I do think the issue she's making now is absolutely crucial to making sure this legislation is absolutely effective. Trading standards departments in local authorities up and down the country have been the butt of quite a lot of cuts because councils can get away with it. Unless we support trading standards departments and trading standards officers and back the Trading Standards Institute, crimes like this will not actually be able to be detected. We won't have the test purchasing on the scale we need to make sure that retailers are acting responsibly.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and since that so many others have gone out with the bill, I would just suggest at the same time they could look at the minimum wage legislation, because that would make an awful lot of help to my constituents too. I think the government could have taken a different approach with this bill. In my speech before Christmas, I argued that several corrosive substances need to be brought under greater control, including ammonia, sodium hydroxide and hydrofluoric acid, as well as sulphuric acid. And I'm reassured that all of those substances I mentioned have been included in Schedule 1 of the bill as a corrosive product. The list in Schedule 1 is new, and it doesn't match the list in Schedules 1 to 4 of the Poisons Act. The Minister could use this bill or a statutory instrument to move more poisons, more chemicals, into Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 of the Poisons Act, meaning that they would require an official licence and photo ID before purchase. This would, I think, avoid us having to rely so heavily on retail staff to spot suspicious purchases and restrict those chemicals to the hands of trained professionals who, I presume, will use them safely. Sulphuric acid has been moved into Schedule 1 of the Act, and, as I and others called for, will require a licence from the end of this week, and that is so very welcome. My question for the Minister, though, is why that decision was made for sulphuric acid only and not the other chemicals that I've highlighted. Why not move hydrofluoric acid into Schedule 2 as a regulated poison? It is highly dangerous, and I said in the debate before Christmas, exposure on just 2% of the skin can kill. Why not move ammonia into Schedule 2 as well, when ammonia was found at 20 out of 28 crime scenes tested by the Met? And perhaps the department has better evidence about which chemicals are being used in crimes or which pose a risk. But if so, I would argue that the case needs to be made and made transparently during the passage of the bill. But that only leads me to welcome the progress that this bill represents and hope that the Minister would agree with me that there are still some serious issues still to be addressed. Thank you very much.